Hello. Today we are going to study the subjunctive, and I'm going to help you.
The subjunctive is a mood, not a tense. There are two moods in French: the indicative mood, which we use to talk about facts and reality, and the subjunctive mood, which we use to discuss will or desire, emotion, doubt or uncertainty, and necessity. Let's look at the indicative. We use the indicative mood to discuss facts and reality. The indicative is the only mood you've learned so far. Let's look at a few examples. Il plie le linge. Elle coupe les branches. Vous préparez l'examen. Je finis le roman. Nous finissons le gâteau. Now let's compare the indicative and the subjunctive. Il plie le linge. That's in the indicative. And in the subjunctive we have Il est important qu'il plie le linge. The sentences that use the subjunctive are written in yellow. The ones in white are indicative. Let's keep going. Elle coupe les branches versus Il est nécessaire qu'elle coupe les branches. Vous préparez l'examen. Il faut que vous prépariez l'examen. Je finis le roman. Vous voulez que je finisse le roman. Nous finissons le gâteau. Vous doutez que nous finissions le gâteau. Notice that each of the sentences that uses a subjunctive has two clauses: an introductory clause that triggers the subjunctive, and a clause that actually uses the subjunctive. Please feel free to push pause in order to study the sentences that you've already seen. We have divided it up by color. The introductory clause that makes us need to use the subjunctive is in lavender. The clause that actually uses the subjunctive is in yellow. Please make sure you push pause to study these sentences. Now, let's recall the things that trigger the subjunctive: will and desire, emotion, doubt or uncertainty, and necessity. Now, let's see them here. You've already seen these sentences. They trigger the subjunctive because they fall into these categories. For example, will and desire, vous voulez que, emotion, doubt or uncertainty, vous doutez que, or necessity, il est important que, il est nécessaire que. Now, why do you have QU apostrophe and not QUE? Oh, that's right, because the word that comes after it starts with a vowel or H. So here are those clauses yet again in context. Now, here's more examples of phrases that trigger the subjunctive, and you're going to need to memorize these clauses. Tu désires que, il veut que, je suis contente que, elle est triste que, je doute que, ce n'est pas sûr que, il faut que, il est nécessaire que, il est important que. So remember, you need two parts to form the subjunctive: an introductory clause that triggers it, and then you need a clause containing a verb in the subjunctive. So hang on a minute. Tell me again, what's this thing that triggers the subjunctive? Oh yeah, it's those things that talk about will, desire, emotion, doubt or uncertainty, and necessity. Now, you've probably figured it out by now. The phrases that introduce the subjunctive usually end in que. Feel free to push pause in order to take a look at these sentences that end, these phrases that end in que. Remember, the clause containing the subjunctive comes right after the word que. So hang on a minute. Here's something we haven't talked about yet. What is this verb in the subjunctive? Well, let's talk about how we get the verb. First, you take the il, elle form of the verb in the present tense of the indicative. For example, with écouter, That's the regular ER verb. The il plural ending is that silent ENT. For finir, a regular IR verb, remember your il plural ending is ISSENT. And for vendre, a regular IR verb, your regular il plural ending is ENT. The next thing you do, you get out your chainsaw and you chop off the ENT. And then you add the subjunctive endings. They're all silent except for the nous and the vous forms, which have an I in them, and it sounds like ion and ier. Let's compare the subjunctive endings to the regular present tense ER endings. Feel free to push pause. Now let's try to form the subjunctive with some common verbs. Let's look at parler. Well, how do we do it? And we're going to do it in the je form. How's that? Well, we take the third person plural, il parle, we chop off the ENT, and we end up with il faut que je parle, or il est nécessaire que je parle, or tu es triste que je parle. Let's do it with manger. The third person plural, chop off the ENT, add the subjunctive endings, and look what we get. Ooh, they all look pretty predictable, don't they? But let's move on down to finir. Normally, in the indicative, you would have je finis. But notice that in the subjunctive, because we have to start off with the il or elle plural ending, we have elles finissent, we chop off the ENT, we add the subjunctive endings, and we get que je finisse. Okay? Partir, one of those pesky mutt verbs, same thing. It's a little bit different than it would be in the indicative. And run back up to vendre, a regular RE verb. Look at the way it ends. It's a little bit different to the indicative as well. Now, it's your turn. I want you to push pause. Make the following sentences into sentences. This work is due the next day in class. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful day.